Welcome to my new podcast where I talk about anything and everything I've read, seen, or heard from books, articles, series, movies, you name it, and probably ranting about stupid book adaptations because book adaptations are source of everlasting disappointment. So if you're looking for a list of books or recommendations, this is probably not the place for you. But if you want to hear someone rave about the story, then grab a cup of coffee or tea or start the laundry because here we are. The Alienist by Caleb Carr. It's not about aliens because alienist is a former term for psychiatrist, because they used to think that people with mental illness is alienated from their true selves. This book would remind you of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It's a very dark version of Sherlock Holmes, but in New York City. Written by Caleb Carr, published in 1994, it stayed in the New York Times best-selling for a while, and the rights to adapt it to a film was sold pretty fast, way before it was published. But Mr. Caleb Carr, being the contrary man that he is, fought long and hard for the adaptation to be the way he wanted it. So it took a long time for the series adaptation to be made. Stupid long, if you ask me, 24 years. But was Caleb Carr satisfied? Of course not. He even asked for his name to be removed from the credits of the series. That should tell you all about what he thinks of the series. He was fairly vocal about his dislike of the casting of Theodore Roosevelt, and I have to say, I'm not a fan as well. Or maybe it was just the way they've written his character in the series. So, to the beginning, because we have to tell it the way it is. 1896, New York City. Flooded with newly arrived immigrants, the resources are stretched thin, and many people are without a proper job. Some are forced to beg. But there's one thing that's always in demand, even at the most trying of times: sex. So, what do we have? Children selling sexual favors to old, dirty men, boys dressed and painted as women, up for sale by the hour. And that's where we find Theodore Roosevelt, newly appointed commissioner of the New York City Police Department, late at night, standing over the mutilated body of a boy dressed in a woman's clothing. This is already the third he knows of in so many months. But people who ran the city of New York is not exactly going to concern themselves in the death of some prostitute, and it's not like he could take this on himself. He was an appointee of an elected official, not exactly the most secure of position. But as luck would have it, the only doctor they could find at the dead of the night to attend the crime scene was one Dr. Laszlo Kreisler, a very controversial psychiatrist whose beliefs and studies offended polite society. Because how dare these alienists say we're bringing up our children the wrong way? That we're screwing them up by handing them over to nannies and visiting the nursery once a week. Dr. Kreisler basically questioned the way the society addresses children's mental health, so there he suggests that parents needed to be concerned about children's mental being, the nerve of this man. So Dr. Kreisler was the one who was called to the crime scene and confirmed the death of the victim. And seeing the body, he thought he'd seen it before. So we got Theodore Roosevelt and Dr. Laszlo Kreisler on the case. But these two men are not exactly the closest of friends. They knew each other back when they were still in university and had a little run in, but they're acquaintances at the most. But they had one person in common: John Moore, a New York Times police reporter. So maybe it would be scandalous for the commissioner of the police department to talk to an alienist, but surely the commissioner can talk to a police reporter. Because you see, the police and the city were not going to do anything about it. What would they get out of investigating the death of an immigrant? Nothing. None, of course. And they were not exactly going to let Commissioner Theodore Roosevelt waste his time doing it, stirring up trouble. John Moore himself is not exactly accepted in polite society himself, even if he came from a well-off family like Chrysler and Roosevelt. But just like his friend Chrysler, he dared suggest his parents had a hand in his brother's death, a death that people suspected were self-inflicted. Because how dare he suggest we drove our son to suicide, right? Yeah, sure, parents. John Moore's an easygoing guy. He wanted to be left alone, living in his grandmother's house, slaving away in his work at the New York Times. But there he was, caught between two of his most single-minded friends, with a scheme to catch a dangerous criminal without any witnesses, with barely any clues. No clues? Dr. Chrysler begged to differ. They have clues, a lot of them. They just need help processing them. And I feel like I need to point out that the series robbed Theodore Roosevelt the honor of starting the idea of the investigation, because it was his idea to get together and to try to find a solution to these murders. And he was even the one to bring up the earlier deaths, and the show put it all on Chrysler and portrayed Roosevelt as almost going against the idea of the investigation, when in fact he was always excited to hear about the progress that they are having with the investigation, as well as all of this new wave or forensic methods that they employed all throughout the investigation. Roosevelt brought in Sarah Howard, one of the new female staff at the police department, and two detectives, Marcus and Lucius Isaacsons, both very knowledgeable in the new ways to conduct investigation. And you gotta remember, this is a time where fingerprinting and profiling were not exactly the way to go. They were not wildly recognized or even practiced, if at all. Their investigations took them to the dirty streets of New York City slums. A few times it brought them to the sitting rooms of the rich who ran the city. Rich people who are curious and concerned that their investigation are disturbing the society's food chain. They're not concerned about justice or peace, they're concerned about money and business. With almost everyone going against them in their quest to find out the truth and stop this killer, what do they find? They found a broken man, an abused child, fucked up by the people who should have cared for him, assaulted by an adult he trusted, a victim who turned himself into the abuser, trying to find justice for the child that he had been, but at the same time trying to destroy that broken child who put his trust in the wrong man. So, what's their conclusion? Be better parents. Don't have kids if you're just going to screw them up. I don't believe kids are born evil. The only thing babies know when they are born is survival. That's why the first thing they do is struggle to breathe. I believe in free will and that we should be held accountable for the consequences of our actions and decisions. But one thing we also need to consider is that those decisions are affected and limited by our circumstances and our personal experiences. So I think it is the parents' responsibility to raise well adjusted individuals. So if you don't think you're up to that, you might want to rethink parenthood for a long while. The Alienist is a very compelling book that deep dives into the psyche of a person and makes you question all you know about life's choices and your motives. It will make you think and evaluate yourself like the characters did in the process of fleshing out their killer. Some critics said that the storytelling was bordering on dull because of the history background in between scenes, but for someone who's not American and definitely not from New York, it gave the setting a premise. It gave me an understanding of the events and the people, especially the historical figures that were mentioned and were involved in the story. It also helped that the story was told in John Moore's first person perspective because it gave a more personal atmosphere. John Moore started as an observer or a passive character drawn into all this by two more proactive individuals, Theodore Roosevelt and Laszlo Chrysler. But as the story progressed, we witnessed as he transformed and became more involved. And finally, in a turn of events, the killer made the case more personal to him. John Moore honestly is my favorite character in all of this, not only because he was the one telling the story, but the book was a character development for him. We are seeing all of this story unfold right before his eyes, so we are definitely going to be drawn to him as the main character, even though he's telling the story of the alienist, which was Dr. Laszlo Chrysler. Caleb Carr's other works are just as amazing. Angel of Darkness, of course, is the follow up to The Alienist, but in a totally different genre is Killing Time, a dark, futuristic sci fi with a bit of dystopian feel. I know, it's a lot. But that's it for me. I hope you pick up a Caleb Carr book next time you're in a bookstore. Connect with me in social media. Details are in the description. I just realized that there's a lot of dog barking in the background. Unfortunately, I couldn't do anything about it. I'm sorry about that. Thank you so much.